The planet Firax was an abandoned graveyard of a war long past. Its barren deserts and empty cities stood as silent monuments to the greatest conflict in human history, an interstellar war that had almost wiped out humanity. At the heart of Firax's broken landscape stood the crumbled remains of a citadel, a once proud structure that housed the Warborn sons, the most formidable creation of humankind. These genetically engineered warriors had been designed for one purpose: to ensure humanity's survival, no matter the cost. For centuries, the Warborn had been left to rot here, forgotten by the very species they were created to protect. Their creators had promised them glory, but when the war ended, they were discarded like broken tools. The Warborn were abandoned, left to fend for themselves on a desolate world. They had been bred for combat, but without a war to fight, they found themselves adrift. Their only company was each other, brothers in arms forged from human DNA and advanced technology, stronger, faster, and more intelligent than any ordinary man. Yet, despite their immense power, they were mere shadows of what they were meant to be. Darius Tal, the commanding officer of the Warborn sons, stood at the highest point of the ruined citadel, staring out across the wasteland below. His once pristine armor was weathered and scratched, a symbol of the years he had spent in isolation, trying to find meaning in a life that had lost its purpose. The sky above was an endless expanse of gray clouds, and the winds howled through the empty streets of the ruined city like the ghosts of those who had died here. The Warborn had trained for decades, honing their skills, waiting for a war that would never come. Darius's mind often wandered to the time before the war ended, when the Warborn were humanity's shining hope. He remembered the faces of the men and women who had created them, the scientists, the engineers, the leaders who had poured everything into the Warborn project. They had believed the Warborn would be their salvation. But when the war was over, they had left them behind. Darius's thoughts were interrupted by the crackle of a transmission, a signal cutting through the silence. His ears perked up. It was faint, almost lost in the vastness of space, but it was unmistakable. A human voice. "Is anyone there? We need help. Please. Anyone." Darius's heart raced. The transmission was coming from the outer colonies. His mind reeled with the possibilities. Could it be? After all these years of silence, was humanity still out there, still in need of the Warborn? The voice was desperate, weak, but unmistakably human. It was a call for help. Darius didn't hesitate. He had waited too long for a purpose, for a sign. This was it. This was the moment the Warborn had been waiting for. "Prepare the ships," Darius ordered, his voice cutting through the silence. "We leave now." His words were met with the quiet murmur of his brothers and sisters in arms, their eyes flicking toward him with a mix of anticipation and disbelief. After so many years of being cut off from humanity, this was the spark of hope they had longed for. Some of the Warborn had come to terms with their abandonment. Some had found new meaning in the quiet existence they'd carved out for themselves. But for Darius, the thought that humanity still needed them, needed him, reignited something deep within. He wasn't sure if they were truly ready. He wasn't sure if they could still fight like they once had. The Warborn had been designed to be humanity's vanguard, but in their isolation, they had become something else. Survivors. But no matter how many years had passed, the heart of the Warborn was still human. They still carried the memories of their creators and the promises they were made. As Darius moved through the citadel, his brothers and sisters began to gather. Some were ready without question, their hands gripping weapons that had not seen use in decades. Others lingered, hesitant, unsure if they were still the warriors they once were. There were whispers among them, doubts about their role in a galaxy that had long forgotten them. "Do you think they'll want us back?" asked one of the Warborn, a tall woman named Kayla. Her voice was rough, worn by years of silence, but her eyes still gleamed with the fire of a warrior. "They won't have a choice," Darius replied, his voice firm. "Humanity needs us, and we will answer. The Warborn were born for war, but after so many years, they had forgotten what it felt like. They had forgotten the taste of victory, the adrenaline of battle, and the weight of their purpose. But Darius's words ignited something within them. The Warborn remembered what they were capable of. They remembered what they had been made for. As the Warborn prepared to depart, Darius stood at the helm of the lead ship, watching as the last of his brothers and sisters boarded. The engines of the ship hummed to life, and the citadel, their prison, began to fade into the distance. The Warborn sons were no longer lost. They were returning to the fight. And this time, they would not be abandoned. The warships of the Warborn sons cut through the blackness of space like a blade through air, their engines humming steadily as they accelerated toward the source of the distress signal. The void of space was eerily silent, but the warships were anything but. Every Warborn on board felt the same urgency, the same anticipation. Humanity, the very species that had created them, was in peril once again. Darius stood at the command console of the flagship, his fingers lightly brushing the controls. The cold, mechanical hum of the ship's systems filled the silence, but his mind was focused on the task at hand. He had led the Warborn sons through countless battles. But this was different. They were no longer just soldiers. They were humanity's forgotten protectors, returned from the void to answer a call for help. "Prepare for entry into the colony's atmosphere," Darius ordered, his voice steady, yet the weight of what was to come pressed on his shoulders. His voice carried across the ship's comms, filling his brothers and sisters with the same sense of determination. The Warborn sons had been created for this moment. They had trained for it, sacrificed for it. Now, they were about to prove that humanity's hope had not been abandoned. The ship shuddered as it broke through the upper atmosphere of the colony world below. Through the windows, the Warborn saw the once thriving world in ruins, smoke billowing from craters on the surface. The planet's cities, once gleaming symbols of human achievement, were now burning. And in the distance, the Warborn saw the terrible truth. An armada of Skelvis ships hovering over the planet, their dark shapes blotting out the sky. "We're too late," muttered Kayla, her voice tight with frustration. She had always been quick to act, but now even she could see the overwhelming odds they faced. The Skelvas had not only arrived, they had already begun their invasion. Their forces were overwhelming, and their presence was suffocating, each ship casting a shadow over the planet's surface. "We're not too late," Darius replied, his voice cutting through the tension. "We've fought worse than this before. Now, we'll fight for them." The Warborn warships descended rapidly, breaking through the smoke and fire of the planet's atmosphere. Below, the human survivors were scattered, struggling to hold on to whatever they could. Small pockets of resistance clung to life, but it was clear that they were losing. The Skelves, with their psychic powers and brutal tactics, were not just attacking. They were decimating humanity's ability to fight back. As Darius's ship landed, the Warborn sons disembarked, stepping onto a battlefield that was nothing like the controlled training grounds of their past. The air smelled of ash and burning metal. The ground beneath their boots was cracked and charred. Above, the sky was a dull red, with the silhouette of the Skelvis ships casting an ominous shadow over everything. The Warborn moved with precision, their enhanced senses alert to every flicker of movement. "They're already here," whispered one of the Warborn, a younger warrior named Jorik. His hand instinctively went to his weapon as he surveyed the landscape, looking for any signs of danger. "We'll find them," Darius said firmly, turning toward the scattered human forces. "There's still a chance." As the Warborn pushed forward, the first Skelves attack came. From the distance, they could hear the horrible screeching of alien ships as they barreled toward the human survivors. The Warborn were ready. With a battle cry that echoed across the ruined landscape, they charged into the fray, weapons drawn. The Skelves, their grotesque forms shadowed by their psychic powers, descended from their ships, their glowing eyes scanning the battlefield for signs of weakness. The Warborn sons were unyielding, But it quickly became clear just how powerful their enemies were. The Skelves didn't need numbers to overwhelm their foes. They had the ability to control minds, twisting the wills of those they encountered. It didn't take long for the Warborn to realize that their physical strength was not enough to match the Skelves' psychic influence. Their minds were being invaded, the air around them buzzing with an unnatural energy. "Focus," Darius shouted, his voice cutting through the mental fog. "Fight together. We are stronger than this." Despite the pressure from the Skelves' psychic assault, the Warborn held firm. Their bond, forged through years of camaraderie, became their greatest weapon. Each Warborn fought with the awareness that their strength lay not in their individual might, but in their unity. They were no longer just engineered soldiers. They were brothers and sisters, bound together by shared purpose. Darius himself faced the first wave of Skelves warriors, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to dodge their psychic blasts with ease. His blade whistled through the air, cutting through the alien flesh with precision. He felt the tension, the struggle within his own mind, but he pushed through. He had to. Humanity needed him, needed them, more than ever before. As the battle raged, the Warborn quickly realized that the Skelves were not merely a physical threat. The mind control that radiated from their queen was overwhelming, a constant pressure trying to push them into submission. But as the Warborn sons fought together, a strange thing began to happen. Where one Warborn faltered, another picked up the slack. Their unity, stronger than ever, allowed them to fight through the mental waves of the Skelves. "We hold the line," Darius said, his voice steady as he cleaved through another Skelves warrior. "For humanity." The Warborn pressed forward, their battle cries shaking the earth beneath them. This was only the beginning of their fight, but it was enough to remind them all that they were not forgotten. They had returned, and the Warborn sons would never back down from a battle, no matter the cost. The dust of the battlefield still hung thick in the air, clinging to the Warborn like a second skin. Their combat prowess had turned the tide of the fight for a moment, but the Skelves were far from finished. The skies above were filled with the dark shapes of alien ships, and the ground was littered with the bodies of both the Warborn and the human resistance. But the battle, while hard won, had only begun to reveal the true depth of the enemy's power. As Darius led the Warborn back to their temporary command center, a series of questions began to eat at him. The Warborn had been created as humanity's ultimate weapon, yet, for all their strength, they were still vulnerable. The Skelves had shown them a terrifying new enemy, an alien species not just physically superior but capable of wielding psychic powers that made them formidable on every level. The Warborn were designed for combat, yes, but they had never faced an enemy that could reach into their minds, twist their thoughts, and manipulate their will. The human survivors, still reeling from the attack, gathered around the Warborn's landing zone. Darius could see the fear in their eyes. The same fear he'd once seen in the faces of his creators when the Warborn had first been brought into existence. Humanity needed the Warborn, but at what cost? Would the Warborn, who had been created to protect, be able to fight for a people who had abandoned them so many years ago? Inside the makeshift command center, Darius and his second-in-command, Kayla, stood in front of a holographic map of the colony world. The map showed the extent of the devastation. The Skelves forces were not just attacking from the air. They had infiltrated the very heart of the planet's infrastructure. The human resistance was scattered and overwhelmed, barely holding on to the last remaining strongholds. "We need reinforcements," Kayla said, her voice low but laced with urgency. "We can't keep fighting like this forever. We're outnumbered, and their psychic powers are unlike anything we've ever faced," Darius finished, his eyes scanning the map. The war was taking a heavy toll on his people, and yet, despite the overwhelming odds, he couldn't help but feel the spark of something old stirring within him. He had been trained to fight and lead, but he had also been trained to think like a human. A leader had to see beyond the battlefield, beyond the immediate crisis, The Warborn had been abandoned, but the people of this world had been left to die alone. Darius could not let them fall the same way the Warborn had. The Skelvis are not our only problem, Darius said slowly, a new thought forming in his mind. We've got other issues. The humans are scattered and disorganized. We've seen their response to the Skelvis. They're terrified, fractured. They need us, but they don't trust us. Kayla shot him a sharp look. You think it's because of what happened all those years ago? Darius met her gaze, and for a moment, the weight of history hung heavily in the air. He didn't need to say anything. He could see the same question on Kayla's face that had been gnawing at his own heart since they first set foot on this planet. The Warborn had been abandoned after the war. Humanity had feared them, labeled them as failures, and then left them to die on Fyrax. And now, after so many years, they were expected to fight for a species that had once cast them aside like broken tools. Humanity doesn't know what to make of us, Darius said finally, his voice quieter now. Some may still see us as weapons, others might see us as monsters. They may never accept that we are as human as they are. I know, Kayla said softly, her voice betraying a hint of bitterness. But it's not the time for that. We need to focus on the war. The Skelvis are still here, and we're not leaving this planet without ending them. Darius nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. The Skelvis were formidable, more so than any force the Warborn had faced before. Their psychic powers were devastating, but it wasn't just their minds that made them so dangerous. It was their willingness to break down everything in their path. They would stop at nothing to conquer this world and anything else that stood in their way. We need an alliance, Darius said suddenly, his gaze narrowing. Kayla raised an eyebrow. We can't win this war alone. We need the humans to fight beside us, and we need to convince them that we are their allies, not their enemies. Kayla didn't respond immediately. She knew what that meant. It meant reaching out to those who had abandoned them. It meant showing the humans that they had more to offer than just brute force. It meant rebuilding trust that had been broken long ago. Darius turned toward the map, his eyes scanning the positions of the human resistance. He knew they would need to make contact, somehow, with the fragmented human forces and try to forge an alliance. But it wasn't going to be easy. The Skelvis had already begun to fracture the human will to fight. But the Warborn were more than capable of breaking that resistance if they could just find the right way to approach it. We'll need to show them we can lead, not just fight, Darius said, his tone determined. The Warborn are more than soldiers. We're human, and it's time we proved that. As the Warborn gathered for their next move, Darius felt the weight of the past bearing down on him. The old wounds, the betrayal, and the fear of his own people still lingered. But as he looked out at his brothers and sisters, he knew they would fight together. They had no other choice. Darius stood at the edge of the human stronghold, overlooking a sprawling encampment that once might have been a bustling city. Now it was little more than a desperate collection of barricades and makeshift shelters, the remnants of humanity's last stand. The few who still held out against the Skelvis were a fragmented force, barely holding together after the alien invasion. The survivors had been forced to scatter, relying on guerrilla tactics to resist an enemy that was slowly suffocating them. Darius's thoughts were interrupted as Kayla approached, her face set with determination. The rest of the Warborn sons were waiting behind her, their eyes scanning the perimeter, alert to any threats. The humans in the camp were wary of the Warborn's presence, some of them even visibly shrinking away, clutching weapons or eyeing them with distrust. "Are you sure about this?" Kayla asked, her voice quiet but edged with concern. "This could go wrong. You know that, right?" Darius turned to her, his gaze steady. "We don't have a choice. We can't fight the Skelvis without them, and they can't fight without us. The longer we wait, the more the Skelvis tighten their grip. We have to try." Kayla sighed, her shoulders tensing. "I just don't trust them to be so eager to join our cause. The humans might be broken, but they're not stupid." They remember how we were abandoned. Darius knew Kella's concerns were valid. The Warborn were not just a symbol of strength. They were also a symbol of betrayal. For all their power, they had been forgotten, left to waste away on Fyrax. To the humans, the Warborn were the forgotten soldiers, the ultimate weapon that had been turned off when the war ended. Some may have viewed them as saviors, others as monsters. And no matter how much Darius tried to convince himself that humanity's survival was the only thing that mattered, he could feel the weight of the past pressing down on him too. They moved forward, their boots crunching on the dirt as they approached the center of the human camp. A group of armed survivors watched them with suspicion, their eyes never leaving the Warborn. One of them, a grizzled man with a scar running down his face, stepped forward. He was a leader, and his posture was stiff, defensive. "What do you want?" the man asked, his voice rough, but not unfriendly. "We're here to help," Darius replied, his voice clear and strong, despite the tension in the air. "We've come to join the fight against the Skelvis." The man's eyes narrowed. "And why should we trust you? The Warborn were abandoned years ago. You were supposed to be our protectors. Now you show up when it's too late." The words hit Darius like a blow to the chest. He knew they were coming, but that didn't make them hurt any less. His hand clenched into a fist at his side, but he forced himself to remain calm. "We weren't abandoned by you," Darius said, his voice steady. "We were abandoned by those who created us, by those who sent us to fight your war, then turned their backs when it ended. But we're not here to discuss the past. We're here to save you." A murmur rippled through the group of humans, some of them eyeing the Warborn with doubt, others with curiosity. The grizzled leader stared at Darius for a long moment, and for a heartbeat, it seemed as though he would turn them away. But then, as if considering the enormity of the situation, he spoke again. "All right," he said, his tone grudging but resigned. "You can join the fight, but you're not leading us. We'll take any help we can get, but we're not going to follow you." Darius nodded, understanding the stipulation. It wasn't about leadership. It was about survival. The Warborn could lead them to victory, but the humans needed to feel like they still had control. He could live with that. After all, this wasn't about who led. It was about the war they had to win. The leader stepped aside, motioning for Darius and the Warborn to follow him. "We'll need your strength. The Skelvis aren't just on the ground. They've been attacking our infrastructure, and their ships are still hovering over our cities. We don't have the numbers to fight on all fronts." Darius's mind raced as he absorbed the information. The Skelvis weren't just an immediate threat. They were systematically crippling the human resistance. Their ability to launch attacks from both the air and the ground gave them an undeniable advantage. But the Warborn had one thing the humans didn't: experience. They had been bred for war, for tactics and strategy. They knew how to fight in the trenches, how to break through overwhelming odds. "We'll need to hit them hard and fast," Darius said. "We'll take out their communications, disrupt their reinforcements, and weaken their hold on this world. If we do that, we can turn the tide." The leader's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "That sounds good in theory, but we've tried hitting them before. Their psychic abilities make it nearly impossible to stay coordinated." Kayla stepped forward then, her voice sharp. "We can handle their psychic interference. We've faced worse before." The leader raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Instead, he nodded. "Fine, you'll get your chance." Over the next few hours, Darius and the Warborn began strategizing with the human resistance. They worked tirelessly to form a plan, identifying key targets where they could strike the Skelvis forces. The humans had the numbers, but the Warborn had the tactics, the precision, and the unwavering determination to turn the tide. As the planning continued, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that this fragile alliance, born out of necessity, was more than just a means to an end. It was a chance for the Warborn to reclaim their purpose, but it was also a chance for humanity to see them not as weapons of war, but as allies in a fight for survival. The price of unity was high, but Darius knew it was worth it. They would fight together. And this time, they would not be abandoned. The plan was set, the alliance formed. Now, it was time for the Warborn to put their strategy into action. Darius stood on the edge of the human camp, looking out into the twilight of the ruined city. The tension in the air was palpable, every soldier from both sides, knowing that they were about to venture into the heart of Skelvis territory. The first coordinated strike would test not only their strength, but also their fragile trust in one another. The human resistance, still uncertain of the Warborn's true intentions, had begun to cooperate, albeit reluctantly. It was a start, but Darius knew that cooperation alone wouldn't be enough to win this war. The human forces lacked the training and experience needed to face an enemy that was as psychologically lethal as it was physically devastating. That's where the Warborn would make the difference. They were designed to endure, to resist manipulation, to fight with a precision that no mere human could match. "We move out in 2 hours," Darius told Kayla, his voice calm but carrying the weight of the moment. His hand gripped the hilt of his weapon, fingers running lightly over its surface. The familiar comfort of the weapon steadied his mind, but the sense of responsibility still gnawed at him. The Warborn were not just warriors. They were humanity's last hope. Failure would mean extinction, not just for the humans, but for the Warborn as well. Kayla nodded, her face set. "I'll get the Warborn ready. But Darius, there's something you need to understand. If this fails, the humans may turn on us. They've agreed to fight beside us, but that doesn't mean they trust us." Darius turned toward her, his gaze hard. "I know, but we fight for them now, not for us. We can't turn our backs on them, no matter the risk." The two of them exchanged a long, silent glance. There was little more to say. The risks were enormous, and both of them knew it. The Skelvas had already infiltrated key human territories. Their psychic ability to dominate minds and cause confusion on the battlefield had made human resistance all but futile. The Warborn's physical strength and unity were their greatest assets, but even they weren't immune to the psychic storms the Skelvis conjured with each step they took. The hour of the assault arrived quickly. The Warborn moved out with precision, falling into formation beside the human soldiers. The war cry that echoed from the Warborn was a signal that the time for hesitation had passed. The Warborn were no longer outcasts. They were fighting for the same cause, with the same purpose. It was a testament to their resilience that they had been able to overcome years of abandonment and mistrust. Darius led the charge, the Warborn forming a protective perimeter around the human resistance. The sounds of battle grew louder as they neared their first objective, a communications relay station that was critical to the Skelvis's command structure. If they could take it out, they would cripple the enemy's ability to coordinate their forces. As they approached the station, Darius's enhanced senses tingled. He could feel the presence of the Skelvis before he saw them, cold, oppressive, like a storm cloud rolling in over the battlefield. The psychic energy was thick in the air, warping everything around him, distorting reality. For a moment, he felt the weight of the Skelvis's power trying to invade his mind. But he shut it out, focusing on the task at hand. His mind was his own, and he wouldn't let them take it. The first wave of Skelvis soldiers appeared, descending from the shadows of the ruined buildings with eerie fluid movements. Their alien forms were horrifying, with limbs that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally, their eyes glowing with an almost malevolent intelligence. As they charged, Darius's heart rate quickened, the thrill of battle surging through him. The Warborn responded instantly, their weapons flashing in the darkened landscape as they met the Skelvis head-on. It was a brutal clash. The Skelvis's psychic powers gave them an edge, their abilities allowing them to strike without moving a muscle, manipulating the battlefield itself. But the Warborn were used to the chaos of battle, their enhanced senses and combat training giving them an advantage in situations like this. They fought as one, covering each other's weaknesses, relying on their unity to withstand the psychic onslaught. Kayla was at Darius's side, her blade cutting through the air with deadly precision as she felled one of the Skelvis warriors. "We need to move," she shouted. "The station is just ahead." Darius nodded, his mind already shifting to the next phase of their plan. They had to break through the Skelvis' defenses and disable the relay station before their presence was detected by reinforcements. Every second counted. The Warborn cut through the Skelvis forces with a relentless fury, their weapons and their unity proving more than a match for the alien invaders. The humans, though still hesitant, had begun to follow the Warborn's lead, pushing forward with growing confidence. The tide of the battle was shifting, slowly but surely, as the Warborn and the humans fought side by side. Finally, they'd reached the communications relay. Darius felt a momentary flicker of doubt, a whisper of uncertainty, as he stepped forward to disable the station's power. He glanced over his shoulder, his gaze meeting Kayla's. There was no turning back now. He placed his hand on the terminal, overriding the system with ease. The power flickered, and the station went dark. For a moment, the battlefield fell into an eerie silence. The Skelvis, realizing they had lost control of their communications, were thrown into disarray. It was a critical blow, but the victory was short-lived. A heavy, suffocating presence descended upon the battlefield, and Darius's blood ran cold as a towering figure appeared in the distance. The Skelvis Queen had arrived. The Warborn sons had barely enough time to react before the Queen's psychic scream ripped through the air, filling their minds with the agony of her power. Darius fought to stay grounded, to resist the overwhelming pressure she placed on his mind. He had faced psychic attacks before, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. "She's here," Kayla gasped, struggling against the psychic assault. "We're going to need everything we've got to survive this." Darius turned to his warriors, his voice cutting through the mental fog. "For humanity, we fight together." With one final, unified roar, the Warborn sons charge, ready to face the most dangerous adversary they had ever encountered. The battlefield had fallen into chaos. The Warborn sons, their enhanced bodies moving with lethal precision, fought against the Skelvis forces with unrelenting fury. But now, as the massive towering figure of the Skelvis Queen descended from the sky, all that had been won seemed to hang in a delicate balance. The psychic pressure she exerted was unlike anything Darius had ever encountered, pushing against his mind, trying to drown him in a torrent of overwhelming thoughts and images. It was as if the very fabric of his being was under attack. Kayla staggered beside him, her face pale as she fought to maintain her focus. "This is insane," she gasped, clutching her head. "We need tow." But her words were lost in the roar of psychic force that emanated from the Queen. Darius could hear the Skelvis Queen's voice in his mind, low and ancient, echoing with a cruel intelligence that seemed to twist reality itself. "You are nothing. You were born to be weapons. Nothing more, nothing less. You will fall, and we will rise." Darius gritted his teeth, fighting back the invasion of his thoughts. He wasn't just a weapon. He wasn't a tool of war. He was more than that. And now he had to prove it. "We don't have time for this," Darius muttered to himself, raising his weapon. "For humanity. For the Warborn." He shouted over to Kayla, who was already struggling to stay standing under the psychic assault. "Kayla, we can't keep fighting like this. We need to break her concentration." Kayla nodded weakly, her eyes narrowing with determination. She was right. The Skelvis Queen's power was formidable, but there was a way to break through her grip. Together, they could fight back, if they could isolate her. "Warborn sons," Darius shouted, his voice cutting through the swirling storm of psychic influence. "Form a perimeter. We take the Queen down. Now." The Warborn reacted in perfect unison, forming a tight ring around Darius and Kayla. They had trained for moments like this, moments when the physical world was distorted by a far greater power. The Queen's influence, while powerful, couldn't reach them all at once. The Warborn had been bred to resist, but even they were beginning to falter under the intensity of the attack. Kayla stepped forward, her hand glowing with a faint blue energy, a gift from the Warborn's specialized combat training. She aimed her weapon at the Skelvis Queen and fired, sending a burst of concentrated energy toward the alien monarch. The shot barely grazed the Queen's shimmering shield, but it served as a distraction, enough to break her focus for just a second. That was all they needed. Darius lunged forward, his body moving faster than humanly possible as he closed the gap between himself and the Queen. He could feel the weight of her presence bearing down on him, but he was no longer fighting the psychic force. He had learned to ignore it, to push through it, relying on the one thing that the Queen's powers could not manipulate, his sheer willpower. With one mighty swing, Darius's blade connected with the Queen's shield, sending a ripple through the psychic field that surrounded her. The Queen hissed in fury, and her psychic scream intensified, causing the Warborn to stagger back in pain. But Darius didn't stop. He pressed forward, slamming his sword into the shield again, harder this time. The energy reverberated through him, shaking him to his core, but he refused to falter. You cannot win. You are nothing but echoes of your creators. The Queen's voice filled his mind once more, trying to break his resolve. But Darius's mind was made of something else, something stronger. He was not a tool. He was more than the sum of his parts. He was a warrior with purpose. Another strike, and then another. This time, the Queen's shield flickered, just for a moment. Darius's heart raced as the opening appeared. With a roar of defiance, he plunged his blade through the Queen's shield, cutting deep into her form. The Skelvis Queen screeched in pain, her psychic powers spasming violently. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The psychic pressure lifted, just slightly, enough for the Warborn to regain their footing. The humans, inspired by the sudden turn of events, renewed their attack. The war cry of the Warborn sons was taken up by the resistance, and for the first time, they fought together with a single purpose: victory. Kayla's voice broke through the chaos, urgent and clear. Darius, now, we can't hold her off much longer. Darius nodded grimly. He knew that despite the Queen's vulnerability, this fight was far from over. Her pain was only a momentary weakness. The Queen was a creature of unimaginable power, and she would retaliate with everything she had. Finish her, Darius bellowed. With renewed energy, the Warborn pressed forward, their weapons slashing through the air. The Queen, bloody but unbowed, struck back with a devastating psychic blast. It tore through the battlefield, throwing Warborn and human soldiers alike into the air, their minds shattered by the force of her wrath. But the Warborn sons were not so easily defeated. As the Queen's psychic power surged, Kayla pushed through the mental fog, firing one more shot. A direct hit to the Queen's chest. This time, the Queen faltered. She staggered, her psychic power flickering, and with a final, desperate scream, she collapsed to the ground. Silence followed. The Skelvis forces, without their Queen's command, hesitated. And in that moment of confusion, the Warborn pressed the advantage, cutting through the remaining Skelvis warriors with brutal efficiency. The humans, now emboldened, joined in, their weapons flashing in the moonlight as they took back the battlefield. Darius stood over the fallen form of the Queen, his chest heaving with exertion. The psychic pressure was gone, and the world seemed to settle into a strange, quiet calm. But even in victory, he knew this was only one battle. The Skelvis were relentless. The war was far from over. "We've won this battle," Kayla said softly, her voice filled with both awe and exhaustion. "But there's more to come." Darius nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yes, and we'll fight until the end. Together." The silence after the Queen's defeat was deafening. The battlefield, once a cacophony of screams and explosions, now lay still, broken bodies, and the wreckage of the conflict scattered across the landscape. Darius stood in the heart of the devastation, his gaze fixed on the lifeless form of the Skelvis queen. Her psychic influence had been immense, but now, with her dead, her forces faltered. The first victory against the Skelvis felt like an eternity of battle, and yet Darius knew that this was not the end. "Is it over?" Kayla's voice broke through his thoughts, a weary question tinged with disbelief. Darius turned to face her, his eyes heavy with the weight of the moment. "It's not over. Not yet. This was just a strike, a wound in their ranks. We've wounded the beast, but it's still alive and watching us." Kayla nodded, but her expression softened. "We've done something we didn't think was possible. For the first time in years, we have a chance to push them back. We're not just surviving anymore. We're fighting back." Darius's gaze drifted over the battlefield, where human and Warborn soldiers alike began to regroup, the first wave of hope lighting up their faces. Despite the immense odds, despite everything, they had prevailed. But his thoughts were clouded with the looming uncertainty. The Skelvis were relentless, and their forces were vast. The queen may have fallen, but the Skelvis leadership still remained intact. And there was something else, something darker, lingering beneath the surface of his mind. A premonition, a warning. The Skelvis had a deeper connection to this world than anyone realized. Darius had always known it, but now the truth was beginning to show itself. "We've lost too much to think this is the end," Darius continued, his voice resolute. "The Skelvis won't let a setback like this stop them. They'll retaliate, and when they do, we need to be ready." Kayla stepped beside him, her hand resting on the hilt of her weapon. "Then we'll be ready. We don't stop fighting. Not until every last one of them is gone from this world." Before Darius could respond, a low rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. A few soldiers stumbled, and some of the Warborn braced themselves, their enhanced bodies instinctively reacting to the tremor. The earth groaned, the very fabric of the planet seeming to shudder in response to the Skelvis's anger. It didn't take long for the reason to become clear. Above, the sky darkened, blotting out the sun. Massive ships, dozens of them, appeared, floating silently like harbingers of doom. They were enormous, their jagged designs sharp and unnatural, silhouetted against the ashen sky. The Skelvis fleet had arrived. "We need to move now," Darius shouted, urgency in his voice as the enormity of the situation set in. The human resistance quickly rallied, and the Warborn were already falling into line, their battle instincts kicking in. The alliance forged in the heat of the first battle had strengthened their resolve, but it was clear now that what they were facing was far beyond anything they had encountered before. The Skelvis fleet, though it had taken a blow with the loss of their queen, was still formidable, and the strike would come fast. They couldn't afford to wait. "We'll fight them off. We'll drive them back into space," Kayla said fiercely, her eyes set on the approaching ships. "We have the power. We have the will." Darius turned to her, meeting her gaze. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that burned in his. "We have more than that. We have each other." The Warborn and humans began to move, their forces organizing quickly in the wake of the surprise attack. The remnants of the communication systems were hacked back into operation, sending a wave of messages to the scattered human resistance groups across the globe. They couldn't afford a drawn-out war. The fleet's arrival meant that the Skelvis were prepared to escalate the war, and the planet would soon be under siege if they didn't act swiftly. Darius's mind worked quickly, piecing together their options. The human forces had been crippled, their infrastructure destroyed, but the Warborn knew the lay of the land. They understood the tactics that would allow them to hit hard and fast. If they could rally the forces in time, they had a chance at forcing the Skelvis into retreat, at least temporarily, but it all depended on speed. "We need to hit their engines. Without that, they can't maintain orbit," Darius ordered, his voice unwavering. "Kayla, take half the Warborn with you. We'll strike from the ground, hit them where they're most vulnerable. The rest of us will go for their communication center. If we can scramble their ability to coordinate, we'll have an advantage. Kayla nodded, her expression grim but resolute. Understood. We'll hit them hard. The Warborn moved with precision, the plan falling into place. Each group, each soldier knew their task and was prepared to carry it out. The humans, bolstered by the success of the previous battle, followed the Warborn without hesitation, though their fear was clear. Darius could see it in their eyes. The Skelvis fleet was something none of them had faced before. But fear was something that could be overcome, especially when they had one thing the Skelvis didn't: unity. As the Warborn and human forces split, Darius could feel the weight of his responsibility. This was it. This was the moment that would define the fate of not just humanity, but of the Warborn. They had nothing left to lose. The last chance for survival was in their hands, and failure wasn't an option. From his vantage point, Darius could see the massive ships descending, their engines glowing with a malevolent energy. But in the distance, he saw something else, something that made his heart skip a beat. Through the clouds of smoke and dust, the distant glow of human ships flickered on the horizon. Reinforcements. Hope was not lost. The Warborn had given humanity a reason to fight again. Now, they would fight together. The battle for Pharax had just begun. The sky was ablaze with fire as the first wave of Warborn and human forces charged toward the Skelvis fleet. The ships loomed overhead, massive and oppressive, blocking out the sun with their alien shapes. Their engines pulsed with dark energy, and their weapons were already powering up, ready to unleash their deadly firepower. Darius could feel the heavy weight of the battle ahead, but there was no turning back now. He looked around at the forces gathered, the Warborn standing in a perfect line, their bodies sleek and intimidating, their weapons ready. Beside them, the humans, their faces painted with determination and fear, clutched their guns tightly. They were united now, fighting not just for survival but for the future. "We fight for each other," Darius muttered to himself. "We fight for humanity." Kayla stood at his side, her eyes fierce. "We've taken down their queen. Now we take down their fleet." Darius nodded, his gaze narrowing as he scanned the vast expanse of the battlefield. The Skelvis fleet was still descending, and there was no time to waste. The Warborn and human teams had split up into groups, each tasked with a critical mission. One would assault the Skelvis engines, the other their communication center. Darius and Kayla's team would handle the hardest part, reaching the heart of the enemy's command vessel. "This is it," Darius said, tightening his grip on his weapon. "Let's move." With a deafening roar, the Warborn and human forces surged forward, their battle cry ringing out across the field. They split off into their assigned groups, some heading toward the Skelvis ships, others toward the critical target points. Darius, Kayla, and their team ran straight for the command ship, which hovered ominously above the battlefield. As they neared the ship, the ground shook with the force of enemy weapons, massive energy beams searing through the air. Warborn and humans alike ducked for cover, dodging blasts and returning fire as they advanced. Darius could feel the pulse of adrenaline in his veins, but he focused. They couldn't afford to be distracted. The Skelvis were notorious for their ability to retaliate at the slightest sign of weakness. They had to hit hard and fast, or they would never get the chance again. Suddenly, a massive blast from the Skelvis fleet's artillery struck the ground mere feet from them. The shockwave sent Darius tumbling, his body slamming against the dirt. He shook his head, disoriented, but forced himself to his feet. Around him, the Warborn and human soldiers were already regrouping, pushing forward despite the devastating blow. "We keep moving," Darius ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We breached that ship." The team pressed forward, the gunfire and explosions surrounding them. Darius and Kayla led the charge, cutting through enemy forces with brutal efficiency. The closer they got to the Skelvis command ship, the more intense the psychic pressure became. It was like walking through a storm of raw energy, a constant tug on their minds, trying to break their resolve. Darius fought against it, focusing on his mission. His mind had been trained to resist, but even he could feel the strain, the subtle whispering voices trying to break his concentration. "You will never win. This world is ours." Kayla, beside him, was showing signs of strain as well, but she pushed through it, her focus unwavering. "Darius, we're almost there. We need to plant the charges." They reached the base of the Skelvis ship, a towering monolith of dark metal and alien designs. It was a fortress, a command center of unimaginable power. Darius's heart pounded in his chest, but he moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The team planted explosives around the perimeter, preparing to take down the heart of the ship. A sudden explosion shook the ground behind them, and Darius spun around to see a group of Skelvas warriors closing in, their weapons raised. Without hesitation, he charged forward, his blade cutting through the air, felling the first Skelvas before they could react. Kayla was right behind him, her energy blade flashing as she dispatched another with swift precision. "Cover the perimeter," Darius barked to the team. "We need this ship to come down now." The Warborn and humans spread out, taking positions to protect the explosives as the final charges were set. The battle raged around them, but Darius knew time was running out. He could feel the ship's engines pulsing with an eerie hum, a warning of what was to come. If they didn't act fast, they would be caught in the blast when the ship went down. The final charge was set, and Darius and Kayla sprinted back, their team falling into line behind them. As they ran, the ship's weapons activated, sending deadly beams of energy streaking across the sky. Darius pushed through the pain, his legs burning with exhaustion as he raced for cover. "Now," Kayla yelled. A blinding flash erupted from the base of the Skelvis ship, the shockwave rippling through the air like a thunderclap. The massive command vessel began to crumble, its immense form falling to the ground with a deafening crash. The explosion sent debris flying in every direction, and the shockwave sent Darius and Kayla sprawling. For a moment, everything went still. Then the sky seemed to split open with the sound of the Skelvis fleet's remaining ships retreating, their engines powering down. Their command ship had fallen, their fleet in disarray. The Warborn and human soldiers, battered and bloodied, rose to their feet, surveying the destruction. The battlefield was littered with wreckage and the bodies of both friend and foe. But they had done it. They had dealt a fatal blow to the Skelvis. Darius took a deep breath, his chest heaving. There was no more psychic pressure. The threat had been broken, at least for now. The Warborn had proven themselves, and humanity had fought back. Kayla approached him, her expression exhausted but triumphant. "We did it," she said quietly. "It's over." Darius shook his head, his gaze turning toward the horizon. The war had not ended with this battle. The Skelvas were not defeated entirely, and the fight would continue. But for the first time, humanity and the Warborn had proven that they could stand together, united. "No," Darius said, a fierce determination in his eyes. "This is only the beginning." And with that, the Warborn sons and humanity stood together, ready to face whatever came next. The battle for the future was not yet over, but the Warborn had shown that they were ready to win it.